So I'm back and I wanted to talk for a few minutes about rights and duties of landlords and occupants. One of my favorite chapters in the book, so I'm sorry I'm not in Jonesboro to enjoy this with you, but we'll do the best we can with this. I do want to tell you that I will miss you as a class because you were one of my favorite classes ever. Don't know if you even realize that, but I really did enjoy having you in class, and I hope you will keep in touch with me. Some of you will be graduating this year, and some of you will not. Either way, I hope you will keep in touch with me and let me know how your career plans and or further educational plans go. So let's talk a little bit about rights and duties of landowners and occupants. First of all, keep in mind there are lots of liabilities involved with land ownership. So that can be kind of something that you want to think about, and you want to purchase insurance, and it will cover some of that at least. So tort law is one area that we need to think about, and some of you have already learned about torts in other classes, but if you have not, you can quickly catch up in this chapter. So there's three categories of torts: negligence, intentional tort, and strict liability. Negligence is basically the accident, the failure to do what a reasonable person would have done under the same circumstances. So if I run a red light, that's negligence. And so if that is something that causes an accident and there's proximate and actual causation, then that may be a negligence case against me. Very likely that it will be. Intentional torts are something wrongful and intentional that I do that causes injury, like a trespass. If I intentionally trespass on your property and it injures your property in some way, that's an intentional tort. Strict liability is when you have responsibility for damage, regardless of whether it was caused by negligence or intentional acts. So, sometimes there are things, for example, keeping dangerous wild animals on property that you know are dangerous. Even if you've done your best to not be careless in taking care of those animals and you haven't done anything intentional, if one of those animals hurts somebody, you may be held liable under strict liability. Trespass is something you need to know about, and it's basically an unauthorized intrusion or invasion of private premises or land of another. So basically, the plaintiff has to prove that they have the right to possession, and unfortunately, it's usually trespass and nuisance, often committed by the adjacent landowner's intentional acts. And since it's intentional, the property loss is not covered by the offending party's homeowner's insurance many times. There are privileges, so sometimes trespass is allowed. That's what a privilege is. And so a property owner can't recover damages, for example, if the property owner has consented to the trespass. And there are several others that you want to look at in the book. I don't have time in this particular lecture to go through all of them, but you can take a look in the book at those. The law of nuisance is sometimes confusing. There is private nuisance, unreasonable interference with the use or enjoyment of land without there being a trespass or physical invasion. So if I play loud music in my condominium and I'm right next door to yours, so I'm bothering you and reducing the value of your property or interfering with the use or enjoyment of your property, that is a trespass. Public nuisance is common to the general public. So it's an act with the property rights interfering with property rights, causing substantial and unreasonable harm to the public. Unreasonable interference with a right that is common to the public. Private nuisance is with the property rights causing unreasonable harm to the private person. So the public nuisance could be something like a factory that emits bad smells. One example was a factory that in one town made hot sauce, and so the smells and the whatever it was, the essence of the aroma that came out made people's eyes burn and bothered people, and that could be a public nuisance. Oops. There's also private nuisance listed here. There's a little chart that's also from the book. And unreasonable harm is the part that's hard because there are going to be nuisances in life. You've been to towns where sometimes there are aromas in the town because of a factory in the town that is very necessary to produce, say, paper or some other product. And the smell may be somewhat unpleasant, but yet you have to do it somewhere, right? And so there's a kind of a balancing act that courts have to do. There's a big chart here, I think it's in the book as well, that gives you the 6 factors. I won't read all of those out loud here because I'm sure you can read them yourself. It gives some examples as well. I strongly recommend that you take a look at this chart. I think it's a very good way to summarize a lot of stuff. And so do take a look at those 6 elements and the examples because that gives you a very good insight into what we're talking about with private nuisance. Also, there's a tort of invasion of privacy, which you may have heard of before. There are 4 kinds. Appropriation, for example, if I take your picture without your permission and use it in my advertisement for some product, that's appropriation. I've stolen your identity, sort of, to use it for my own good without paying you and without permission. If I tell your secrets, if I'm your CPA and I know some private things and I've disclosed that publicly in the newspaper or somewhere, that's an invasion of privacy. If I display or talk about you or somehow publish something about you showing you in a false light, or if I intrude on you in some way, like I spy on you through your bedroom window, that would be a tort. Now, moving on, lost, mislaid, and abandoned property. When a person loses property, the finder usually can keep it until the right owner comes forward. But there are some special things that you need to know about. All right, so lost property is where when I just lose something, maybe I drop my keys in the parking lot. That is lost property. On the other hand, if I take my keys somewhere and lay them down, say on the sink in the restroom in a restaurant, and deliberately place them there, but then forget to pick them back up, that's mislaid. And those are 2 different things. So lost property is different from mislaid. There are also statutes, so don't forget that, that may define what rights you have and what you have to do. These are just some general examples of what usually happens. There's also abandoned property. So if I take a piece of jewelry and throw it in the trash because I'm angry at someone who gave it to me, I may have abandoned that, and then it's up for grabs, basically. So also there's a nice, neat chart that I believe is in the book that gives you some ideas. So if there is a type of property or place it is found, it makes a difference, private versus public. Also, lost versus mislaid. So lost property, the finder of the property has rights to it until the true owner comes forward. Then the true owner has it. Mislaid, though, it's the owner of the real estate where the mislaid property was. So if I lay my keys on the sink in a restaurant and someone else finds them, they should turn them in to the owner of that restaurant, the owner of the real estate, because it kind of makes sense because I may come back to that restaurant, look for my keys later, and so it makes it easier for me to find them. And the owner of the real estate is the secondary or the person second in line to own that property. If I never come back to get the keys, it belongs to them, not to the person, maybe the other customer who finds it. Buried property can be on private property, and the owner of that property may own that. It varies by state law if it's treasure trove, like gold coins or something like that. Some will say the owner of the real estate, some will say the finder. And so do take a look at that. All right, duties to persons entering the land. You have legal issues here. There's trespassers, child trespassers, licensees, or invitees. So trespasser comes in with no permission of the owner. Child trespass is just a child who trespasses. And then there's this attractive nuisance doctrine that I think we talked about maybe before Thanksgiving for just a couple of minutes. So you do have some duty of care to a trespassing child who cannot appreciate the danger from an artificial condition or activity on land to which the child can be expected to be attracted, like a swimming pool with no fence is a great example of that. you have some issues there if a child wanders onto your property and the child is young enough, too young to appreciate the danger of just jumping in a pool when the child can't swim. Then you may have liability. Even if you may think, well, the parents should be watching the child, that's not going to be enough to get you out of trouble. So if you have a swimming pool, fence it in, and also make sure that you have lots of insurance. Licensee is a person permitted to enter for the licensee's purpose, not for the purpose of the possessor of the property. So most of the time there has to be reasonable care, and you do have to warn them of hidden dangers. So if you know there's a place in the floor where somebody might fall or whatever, you do have to warn about that, or a loose handrail, whatever it is. Some statutes limit a landowner's liability when a member of the public is injured while using the land for recreation purposes. Now, also, there is something called an invitee. That's somebody who is invited by the owner or occupier of the land. And there's a little bit of difference in the duty of care. There's a full duty of reasonable care to a visitor who is an invitee. So know the difference between licensee and invitee, and understand the difference in the duty of care. And sometimes the categories are a little merged. So you can see here, there's also a chart. These are great, especially since you're so lucky to get open book tests for the final. So hopefully you'll be good. Now, I don't have time, again, in this video to go over individually each case. But what I want you to do yourself is make sure you go through these cases very carefully and go through them together and work out questions about those. If you have questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I will be happy to hear from you. But there's some cases about all of these different issues involved, and they're interesting cases, I think. So again, thank you so much for taking my class. I hope I see you again in the hallways, or if you're graduating in December, I hope I see you again when you visit campus. Certainly feel free to friend me on Facebook if you haven't already, or be a contact for me in LinkedIn. I would love to do that so I can follow your career throughout the years. I think a lot of you are going to be very successful. So have a great rest of the week. Have a great weekend, and good luck on all of your final exams. Good night.